All right, everybody. Welcome back to From the Other Sideline. I'm your host, Melissa Treebwasser. This week, TCU is on a bye week, which means instead of going to next week's opponent, we reached out to one of the foremost experts in Texas collegiate football. We are here today, lucky to be joined by Sam Kahn of The Athletic. Sam, thank you so much for jumping on and talking all things Texas football with us today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Well, and it's a pretty good weekend to do kind of a state of college football in the state of Texas and in the Big 12 because Saturday was crazy bonkers, nutso, and there are quite a few things to talk about. We'll obviously want to touch on TCU at the state of the program under Sonny Dykes, but let's just kind of talk about big picture college football in Texas right now. You had a lot of marquee games really across the state, across the Big 12 and beyond. Obviously, Texas hosting #1 Alabama. I believe that's the game that you were at. You were there down in Austin on Saturday. Is that correct?
Actually, I was not. We had some plans change last minute, so I was not there. I was actually at home monitoring everything. We had a big crew there with Stu Mandel and Max Olson and Aaron Suttles were all there, but I ended up staying home because I'd went to Texas the week before and I have some other stuff that I'm working on over the weekend. So I was able to kind of take the bird's eye view of that game, Texas A&M, App State, Houston, Texas Tech, the whole nine, Baylor, BYU. So
Yeah, and it's I'm kind of glad that you transitioned into that. Obviously, want to talk about Houston and Texas Tech and what Joey McGuire just kind of has the Red Raiders believing for the first time in a while, it seems like. But then let's get right into that kind of that BYU Baylor game because to me, because it was such a late night game, I'm out here on the West Coast, so and it was still a late night for me. But that might have been the game of the weekend, just from a sheer like two really good teams playing really exceptional high level football for the most part. We won't talk about the kickers, but everything else, like when you watch that game and you look at Baylor coming in as the preseason favorite to win the Big 12, a top 10 team in the country, taking on a really tough challenge and going to Provo at night to play. What do you take away from Baylor and how they kind of fit in the big picture of college football this season?
I think there's a few things from that game in particular. One is I think I still feel really good about where they sit defensively. Certainly they have some pieces to replace, and Jaron Hall from BYU, I mean, he made some terrific throws. I mean, some of those are just going to be really hard to defend because that guy made NFL caliber throws. But overall, I still felt like they played fine defensively. There were some concerns for me from an offensive standpoint. They certainly had to fight in the run game, although I thought they did a pretty good job with, Quaylon Jones and Squirrel Williams. But it didn't seem to me like they trusted Blake Shapen a ton. And I don't know how much of that is it Blake or is it the receivers are just not there yet because they had to replace their two starting receivers from a year ago. And talking to Jeff Grimes, our offensive coordinator this offseason, you could tell that was a position that they were going to have to really grow up in a hurry. So I still think they're a good team, but certainly I don't look at them as a clear-cut favorite in the conference the way I did coming into the year. I just feel like that game, despite it given credit to BYU, this is a good team and it's on the road in a tough environment at night. And it's not to say that Baylor's not a good team, but I think I felt like, to me, they were the clear favorite in the conference with Oklahoma and Oklahoma State kind of sliding right behind them. Now I kind of have a few more questions because of what I saw at receiver and because just some of the mishaps that they had in Provo on Saturday.
You kind of brought up the not trusting Blake Shapen, and I had the exact same thought, especially down the stretch. I mean, when they get into overtime and you're on a short field and you have those opportunities, I think at one point they ran it 9 straight times or something like that. Obviously, you made a great point with the receivers. They're young, they're inexperienced. We've seen what that can do to an offense. I mean, if you watch the Cowboys Sunday night, you saw the same thing, right? But at the same token, Blake Shapen won the job. It's not like he was the only option. He beat out Gary Bohannon, and it's not, Baylor's had no shortage of elite quarterbacks come to their university. How much of that is we don't trust them? How much of that is the pressure that the BYU line was getting and the way they were kind of getting into the backfield? And can they overcome losing so much elite skill talent to the NFL and to graduation in order to keep up with the Big 12 offenses, most of whom have looked pretty sharp so far early?
I think they will because I do think that the raw talent is still there. When we saw Blake last year in the 2 starts that he made, the last regular season game against Texas Tech and then that Big 12 title game, I think you saw what he can do. So I think the ability is there. I would probably chalk some of this up to environment, like you said, BYU did a good job of pressuring. And like I said, that's a really good football team, too. You knew they were going to be charged up because BYU went to Waco last year and they got handled pretty good by Baylor. So this was a game that those guys were going to be really up for. And you knew that this is a pretty good BYU team. They're in the top 25 for a reason. So that's and that's Blake's first true road game experience, because last year the games that he started were a neutral site game and a home game. So he hasn't really had to be the starter and be the guy on the road, and that's a tough environment to go into for the first time. So I'm not super concerned about it, but it did, like I said, it did raise some questions just on where exactly are they offensively. And clearly, too, I say all this about the passing game, and I thought they did a good job running the ball, but they don't have an Abram Smith yet. That Tay McWilliams, they got banged up a little bit. Quaylon Jones, I thought, looked good. Squirrel Williams looked good, and Richard Reese, the freshman, came in there. So they've got a lot of guys, but they don't have, it doesn't seem like they've established a bell cow yet in the way that Abram Smith was, who, of course, broke the single season rushing record. So when you have all those question marks, that's going to manifest itself on a Saturday night. But I still think long term, because of what they have up front, from a talent standpoint and a depth standpoint, both on the offensive and the defensive lines, I still think they'll be okay long term down the road.
I was shocked not to see Ben Sims in the red zone down the stretch. I mean, where with all of the things that you bring up, all the inexperience, you have one of the elite tight ends in college football, and he disappeared down the stretch. Not because they couldn't find him, but they just weren't even looking for him, it seemed. But
Yeah,
that's all the Baylor we could talk about on a TCU centric podcast. But, I feel like I was really close to complimenting them, and I don't want to ruin my reputation here too much. So let's talk about your Houston Cougars. Proud alum here of the university. And what Joey McGuire has done at Texas Tech. Obviously, that's a big win for them over a ranked opponent at home. Maybe this Houston team isn't quite where they're going to be by the end of the season, but there was so much positivity, so much hype, so much trash talk from Tech fans because Joey McGuire has them believing. And you've been in Texas long enough to know, I've been around Tech fans long enough to know the most dangerous thing you can give to a Red Raider is a little bit of hope. And the batteries and the tortillas are going to be flying at AT&T Stadium soon enough again. How, with the injury, they're going to be without their starting quarterback for a while, but with the way that they're playing, the belief that they have, how real is Texas Tech? What's their ceiling this fall?
that's the most fascinating thing to me, because I felt like this team coming into the year had the potential to be better than last year's Tech team, although it may not play out on the schedule or in the win and loss record because of how tough their schedule is. But one of the very first tests in that tough schedule with Houston, they've passed that one. Now they've got NC State coming up this weekend, which is going to be another one, and that's a road game. So that's going to be a tough one because that's a top 25 team on the road. Although I would say maybe I wonder if NC State is a little vulnerable. They started off the season with a very, very narrow win against ECU. So it's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out. But I do think this is still a potential bowl team. It's now, especially that they won that Houston game, I think that positions them well in that regard. But it's going to be interesting to see, like you said, the impact of the injury. I do think they have a lot of confidence in Donovan Smith. He played well down the stretch last year. I thought he was really good in the bowl game against Mississippi State. And then, of course, on Saturday, you got to love the way he was poised down the stretch and helped lead them that overtime win. So losing Tyler Shuck is tough, but Donovan seems plenty capable. And I know they like Baron Morton, who's behind them, although he doesn't have as many reps, but I know they like him a whole lot. And I think the talent around him with the Zach Kitley offense, I think they're going to be able to score points. And then defensively, I think they've got enough talent overall. It's just going to be a matter of, do they have enough depth, especially up front? That's going to be the question for me with Tim DeRuyter. But I think DeRuyter's a veteran coordinator. He knows how it's done. He's been in this state before. So I'm sure they'll do fine. But I think from a ceiling standpoint, I think they're a bowl team. The question is, can they be a 7 or 8 win team? And I think this weekend against NC State will tell us some of that. If you go in there and win and you start 3-0, then you could be talking about an 8, maybe even a 9 win team. Maybe that might be stretching a little bit, but you're talking about a pretty good team here if you start 3-0 with this non-conference schedule.
I think it was, it kind of got lost in the sauce a little bit because of some of the major upsets that were going on elsewhere. But a believing Texas Tech team is a dangerous group. They've never been short of skill talent, nobody looked more impressive at Big 12 media days, just from a physical standpoint, than Texas Tech's guys. That giant of an edge rusher that they brought in, that everybody was looking up to, like, who is this kid? So that'll be. I think they're going to be really interesting to watch. Let's touch just a little bit on Texas and Alabama. I'll bring the TCU story into this. I think that there were a lot of if most TCU fans were like me, there were a lot of conversations in your group chats about, oh, so now Gary remembers how to do this again. How much input do you think that Patterson had in Pete Kwiatkowski's game plan for Alabama? How much credit does the defense get? And what does this say about the overall state of Texas football today versus where we maybe thought they were 2 weeks ago?
I think we'll find out more as the next few weeks come as far as state of Texas goes, because, and the reason I say that is, yes, they performed really well against Alabama, and I was stunned with particularly how well they played defensively. I thought they played fast, they played physical. To borrow the guy you just mentioned, they play like an old Gary Patterson defense used to play at TCU.
It was really hard to watch, Sam. It was really hard to watch.
Yeah. I mean, they tackled and they were gap sound, and these are all things that they weren't doing well a year ago. Does Gary have something to do with that? A little bit, I think, but I don't imagine he's doing very much on-field coaching. I think Gary is there mostly as a resource for Steve Sarkisian to bounce things off of, to say, if you're Steve Sarkisian and I have my game plan, I can come to Gary Patterson in the middle of the week and say, this is my offensive game plan. How would you, Gary Patterson, defend it? Because that is where somebody like GP becomes very valuable, because GP was a mastermind at being able to exploit other teams' weaknesses on offense. And so being able to adjust based on what a defense may throw at you. And Gary's just got a long history of just success, knowledge, and from what he did in his own scheme. I think that influence has certainly helped the program overall. And it's a way to help Sark, who, again, this is his first head coaching job since the USC deal, which was back in the mid 2010s. It's a way to kind of fill some of the gaps there and say, like, okay, hey, don't forget this, remember that. Little things like that I think have helped. But part of it too is just talent. I think Texas has upgraded its talent overall. Their defensive line's a year older, which helped. They did some work in the portal, got a transfer linebacker who's helped a lot. Some of these young freshmen that they recruited last year, or some of the redshirt freshmen that were in the previous class have started to play. They're starting to come in their own. So I think it's a combination of a lot of things. But I think if Texas goes this week against UTSA and plays like they should, which is play like they did against Alabama and go win that game fairly convincingly, and they go into Texas Tech and they play really well in Lubbock, then I'm going to be convinced that we're moving in the right direction. To me, I still want to see the next couple of weeks, because we've seen teams in the past, not just Texas, but we've seen other teams in the past play up to a really, really good opponent and not follow it consistently. So that's going to be the charge for Sark and that team is, can you do this and play with this effort and this discipline week in and week out?
Yeah, I think that was it. It's the effort and the discipline are the two things the Texas program has really been lacking. I mean, the talent has never been an issue on paper. I mean, Texas could still, for the most part, get pretty much whoever they wanted. They've lost some of those bigger recruiting battles, to Ohio State and Alabama with A&M, obviously. But by the same token, you never looked at the roster and said, these guys just don't have the pieces to make it work. What you saw on Saturday was a group of people that were committed to the same goal and actually executed a game plan that made sense for the opponent. And so that, if Texas gets it together, in that regard, and the game prep and the game execution, then they become a lot scarier, because the talent is always why every single season Texas goes in as a preseason top 25 team, if you look at it on paper. Now, the Quinn Ewers injury, it seems like Sark is kind of keeping a lid on that right now. And so obviously that could be something. But if you believe the rumors coming out of fall camp too, Hudson Card was neck and neck with Ewers throughout camp and that battle for QB1. So it's going to be, I think they're fascinating. Like you said, the next couple games are really going to show us a lot about who the Longhorns can be going throughout the season. All right, let's talk TCU. So you and I have talked a little bit this off season and in the last year about where TCU was and the changes that we've seen since Sonny Dykes has come in off the field. The embracing the NIL, the embracing the marketing, the opening the doors to practice and the press conferences and different things, making freshmen accessible on the microphone, all of these things that such a departure from the previous regime in such a refreshing way. But as a impartial observer, not much of a challenge for the Frogs through the first two games. Colorado might be the worst Power 5 team in the country this year. I mean, Kansas looks competent. We'll talk about that in a bit. But so what are you seeing on the field? From a talent standpoint, from an execution standpoint. Max Duggan had the game of his life on Saturday. Is TCU able to rise to the occasion in Sonny Dykes' first year and be a bowl team and maybe kind of have the kind of season you were talking about Tech having?
Yeah, I don't think there's any reason to think they shouldn't be a bowl team. And I know, you look at Vegas over-unders and things like that, it, can be a little tricky, but I look at just the team speed they have, and then how much depth and experience they have at quarterback. It certainly helps. Obviously having Max come in clutch there, obviously after the Chandler Morris injury. But I mean, watching those guys, that Colorado game to start, watching all those guys run around, particularly Max, of course, which we know he's a great runner, but when watching Sam Jackson run around, I was just like, wow, like he's an electric talent. I understand now why every time I talked to Garrett Riley this offseason, he was like, yeah, this guy is really, really talented. I look at the run game. I feel like you've got enough pieces. You've got obviously a future NFL star in Quentin Johnston. The thing that's impressed me the most about this team so far is how sound they've looked defensively, considering the fact that you've gone from doing things one way for a long time. And I granted all these players haven't been here for 20 years, but Gary Patterson has done things one way for a long time defensively. And making a scheme change to what Joe Gillespie's doing with this 3-3-5 is difficult, not only just doing it when you've been doing it one way, but also because the personnel isn't always going to fit. You're always not going to have the right ideal pieces because you haven't been recruiting to this for the last few years. But the thing that has stood out to me about them is how sound, how fast they've played, and they've tackled really well, I thought. And at least definitely in the Colorado game that I watched, I was impressed with just how fast they played and how well they tackled. And to me, early in the season, you expect to see a lot of mistakes, and I just didn't see a ton. So that to me gives me optimism from that standpoint. Obviously, they went through some growing pains in that opener offensively. They had some trouble throwing the ball. They had some trouble, I think, getting to Quentin, certainly. But I do like Garrett Riley's ability to adjust. He was willing to adjust when things weren't working, throwing the ball. It's like, hey, let's just run the damn ball as much as we can. You go run it for 275 and call it a day. I think there is that sometimes I think is underrated because you do have a lot of coaches who are going to just bang their heads against the wall and do what they believe in until it happens. There may be a coach in College Station who may have done that this weekend, but I credit Riley for that. And this is going to take time. This is not an overnight process. I don't look at TCU as a team that's going to go contend for the Big 12 title this year. This is a program that made a massive change, and it's a culture change. There's all kinds of things from top to bottom that are being done in this program. It's going to take some time, but I do think there's enough talent there for them to be a factor in this league. And like you said, I think to be a bowl team, I don't think there's any reason to think they can't be.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair assessment. The way they ran to the ball defensively, I think that's what's been lacking. You look at the last 2 years of under Gary Patterson, who remains an elite defensive mind in the sport, but there just wasn't that sense of urgency on defense whatsoever. And again, have not played a difficult team yet, but to be able to make adjustments at half and come out and insert, put your will onto Colorado in the second half was great. And then to see a really overmatched team that does have some really nice offensive players in Tarleton State. And I mean, just cut through them like a knife through a hot knife through butter. I think that was a good sign. I want to ask, you mentioned the problems throwing the ball, and Chandler struggled. Now, again, first game, new offense, blah, blah, blah. But do you think that there's any scenario when he comes back healthy that he is not the starting quarterback in his first game back? Is Max going to hold on to that role, or do you think that?
I think it's hard to say. I think you could absolutely see them still playing multiple guys. I mean, they clearly have been comfortable doing it to this point. So I think it's really hard to tell. But if it ultimately depends on if Max is going to throw like he threw the other night with 5 touchdowns, it's kind of hard to pull him out, right? And especially given he's a veteran guy, a multi-year starter, the guy's seen everything. It's hard to take that away from him. But at the same time, if you felt like Chandler was the best guy coming out of camp, then obviously he deserves that chance too. I think that's going to be a feel thing for Sonny Dykes and Garrett Riley to just get a feel for where's Chandler at physically, B, how much do we think will this help, or could this disrupt, what we have going if it's going well? And I think that SMU game obviously is going to be a huge test for them because you're going to have to score points in that one offensively. I mean, they've looked really sharp so far,
Yeah.
and Rhett Lashley and them, they're going fast and they're throwing it all over yard and they're deep. I mean, they've done a really good job. Obviously, Sonny had a huge hand in building that roster. They did a great job when he was there in the portal, and now Lashley this last offseason has done a fantastic job in the portal. So it's going to be interesting to see. But I think overall, like I said, it'll be fascinating to see how it works out. But that SMU game is going to be huge. And I think just seeing, like you said, going back to what you're saying defensively, you made a really good point about Patterson. For some reason, that last year, especially last year, I remember going to the SMU game last year, and that defense was missing that edge that I used to see a Gary Patterson defense play with. They used to play with a certain edge and a certain speed, and I just didn't see it last year. And I think you're starting to see that come back a little bit now.
Yeah, it's similar to what we said about Texas Tech. You get these guys believing and buying in, and it can really it doesn't take much to change the fortunes of a college football program, especially in a year where there doesn't seem to be a dominant team in the Big 12. Just really quickly around the rest of the conference, I'd be remiss not to bring up Kansas. I mean, to start 2-0 at Kansas, doesn't matter who you're playing, it's a huge deal. But to go into Morgantown, historically one of the toughest places for every Big 12 team to play, and to not just win, but to look confident and comfortable for the entire game. That was really a foreign thing to see with the Jayhawks. How good is Lance Leopold, and how long is it before he leaves for Nebraska?
I don't know. That's a great question. I selfishly, and I don't have any connection to Kansas, but I kind of hope for everything that program has been through that he's there a while. But I understand, obviously, if he wants to take on another opportunity, that that's just life. But I'll tell you what, you think you started to see signs of it last year.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to make the punchline joke about Texas losing to Kansas, but Kansas played really well in that game. And let's not forget, they were this close to beating Oklahoma. Caleb Williams had to make a miraculous play late in that game to keep Oklahoma from losing that against Kansas. And I think Lance Leipold has finally given them a foundation, some belief, some stability, and a reason to hope a little bit. And I think that first year being able to have those results, to play a top 25 team to the brink like they did Oklahoma, to beat Texas on the road in a back and forth game like that, those do so much for your culture when you're trying to build from the ground up. And Leipold has experience doing that. He's had experience building up at Buffalo. He had experience building up at Whitewater. He's been a program builder. So it's been a great fit. I thought it was a terrific hire when they made it. And so far, you see the progress on the field. They've done a fantastic job. And I think it's great for Kansas fans because they've been through a lot of bad football the last decade plus.
How hot is Neil Brown's seat? It looked like after the way they played at Pitt and the backyard brawl that he had him kind of humming. But the way that game finished, the play calling down the stretch, which was some of it was a little bit interesting. Obviously, you lose on a ball that a wide receiver needs to catch, but losing to Kansas at home, even though Kansas is clearly on the verge of turning the corner, that's enough to put in a guy who I don't think the fan base is really bought into, or the donors, boosters, etc. Is he going to make it through the season? What does he have to do to stay?
They got to get back closer to getting back to a bowl game because this is year 4, and you brought in the big transfer quarterback and JT Daniels. You've got some talent back. You've still got some culture guys back, but they did lose a lot in the portal in the offseason, which was a little bit troubling, but you still felt like, especially after that first game against Pitt, you felt like, okay, this team lost this game, but this team still has something. And then again, it's no disrespect to Kansas, but you can't lose that game at home if you're West Virginia. So that is tough. And so they're going to have to turn it around in a hurry. And their schedule is not easy. They still got Virginia Tech on the schedule. Then, of course, you get into Big 12 play, which obviously is its own beast to get through. It's going to be tough. And the thing is, Neil Brown was such a different personality from what they had prior with Dana Holgerson. I think the fan base welcomed that and enjoyed that. But at some point, you've got to show some forward progress and you've got to win. And they struggled so much to throw the ball in the past few years and struggled to find the right quarterback. They finally got the right one. And now you're starting 0-2. Like I said, I get it. It's a tough start, and they have that tough non-conference schedule. But yeah, he's gonna have to at least, I think, probably get back to a bowl game. But and then today, I think earlier today, the AD released a one of those statements about we're gonna,
Oh, no
be
vote of
focused on.
confidence. Did they
Yeah,
give him a
yeah.
vote of
So
confidence? Neil, it was nice knowing you, buddy.
yeah, so that always puts you on high alert, right? So we'll have to see, but I do believe that team still plays hard for him. I always thought they have, and that's one thing that stood out to me about West Virginia is that they do play hard for him, but you got to finish these ball games.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know we should give a little love to Iowa State for finally winning the Cyhawk, but I don't even acknowledge Iowa's a football team this year. I do want to just briefly graze on Kansas State, who a lot of people kind of had as a dark horse potential in the Big 12. I think they are flying under the radar, which is exactly what they want to do. But they put a hurting on a Missouri team that I think people thought were going to be fairly decent for an SEC East team this year. I don't think anybody kind of expected them to come out and just physically dominate an SEC program the way that they did. How worried should the rest of the Big 12 be about how for real Kansas State might be?
This is a good team. This is flat out a good team, and I think it's funny. We were joking. Some of us at the Athletic were joking that I think Kansas State almost stopped being the kind of trendy, underrated pick because we were all saying it. We were all saying
Yeah.
that this is a team that could make that run. When you look at what they have with Deuce, and they brought in Adrian Martinez, and then you when they got so much experience back on the defensive front, and they're in the second year of that system. So all those things add up to, and they've been, I thought, the way they finished last year, because they started good, then they had a little bit of a losing streak, and then they bounced back from that in a real big way. And I thought that was, again, a big culture building moment for that program, for Chris Kleiman. And they've had some signature wins over there. Of course, they've had those wins over Oklahoma since he's been there. So they've had moments that show, hey, we know how to get done. And that is a staff and a coach that knows how to win. Obviously,
Yeah.
they've done it before, obviously at a different level, but they've done it before. So when you have one of the best players in the country in Deuce, you've got, like I said, a second year in defense, you got some experience up front, and you got honestly one of the best defensive players in the country, and definitely one of the best in the conference. I think you have some really, really good pieces. And so this is a team that, yeah, I would not be shocked at all if they're in Arlington in December.
Yeah, and if this is the Adrian Martinez redemption tour, I mean, that poor kid deserves it. I guess not kid. I think he's probably 35. He's been playing football for so long, but yeah, that's great. Okay, I would be absolutely remiss too if we didn't just take a moment to laugh. I mean, to talk about Texas A&M, since you are a Texas college football authority. You kind of mentioned Jimbo earlier. They gave him a massive extension. He's had some moments, beat Alabama. But they really haven't done anything to cash that $75 million check yet. And then losing to App State, I mean, what are the rumblings out of College Station? What are the message boards doing? And can Jimbo, can he survive this by winning an SEC West title? Is that what it's going to take to kind of get the taste of losing to App State at home out of your mouth?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that they have to do that, but boy, it's the feeling's not good in College Station right now. I think Texags, the boards were burning up this weekend after
Oh, I
that
felt it
loss.
out here. I was like, is that another wildfire, or is that just Texags? Heat coming off of Texags. I don't know.
Yeah, it was rough because I don't think, and I personally was not somebody that pegged them as a playoff team this year, but I certainly thought it was a team that could win double digit games. I thought 9-3, 10-2 was not out of the question for this team because just on sheer talent, they've recruited 4 straight top 10 classes. And of course, just coming off the number 1 class in the country, when you compile that much talent at some point, and I say it when you go watch them practice, they're starting to look physically like the LSUs, the Georgias, the Alabamas of the world. Their guys just look like that coming off the bus. And so at some point you figure that's going to take over. No disrespect to App State, who's got a veteran-laden team and played really hard and played really well, but you cannot lose that game at home against Texas A&M. You just cannot. You're in year 5 of the program. You've gotten Jimbo's gotten everything he's asked for from a facility standpoint, from a contract standpoint, from a resource standpoint, everything. You've got all the talent. You stacked up all these top 10 classes, and you cannot lose in year 5. You got your handpicked quarterback with your offense. You're calling it, the whole thing. You cannot lose that game at home to App State. So this puts a huge amount of pressure on this Miami game from the bounce back and on the rest of the season, because you look at their schedule does not get very much easier. After Miami, they don't play another home game until October 29th. Then when Ole Miss comes to town. So that's going to be really, really tough for them. I think this year you're wondering now, are you looking at a 8-4 season again when you probably should have been taking a step forward and then setting yourself up for a playoff run in 23? Jimbo's not going to go anywhere because he's guaranteed $93 million, $94 million over the next 10 years. So there's nothing they can do in that regard. But they've got to do something because there's clearly something wrong, because there's no reason with that talent advantage and that resource advantage that you should lose that game. And it's not the first time that they've underperformed. It may be the first time they've lost a game like that, but there have been times in recent years, or even last year when they went to play Ole Miss, or when they lost to Arkansas and Mississippi State. Those were two games before the Alabama game that they looked listless in. Offensively, they couldn't get anything going. And so I don't know if Jimbo needs to make changes offensively, or if there's a quarterback change that needs to be made. I don't know what the answer is, but I know that whatever they put on the field Friday can't happen again, because if they do, then this is going to be a really ugly season for them.
I mean, you say there's nothing they can do, but if they lose to Miami this weekend, then they'll be passing that collection plate on TechSide. They'll have that 93 million in 2 hours. I promise you that. Okay, couple rapid fire questions to close out our time. Which two teams are playing in Arlington for the Big 12 championship this December?
Man, I was gonna say at the start of the year Baylor and Oklahoma, and now I'm a little bit nervous on Baylor.
Waffle. Let's get a fresh prediction.
I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to stick with Baylor and Oklahoma. I'm going to say that I think Baylor's going to figure it out and they'll get back, and it'll be, I think Baylor and Oklahoma will get it.
And who wins?
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma takes it.
Yeah. I think so far I like what I've seen from them. I think they're off to a good start. And I think Venables was the right hire for that program. I really do. I think after what happened with Riley, it was a tough transition for them, but I think that was a good hire from their standpoint. And having Levy and Dylan Gabriel together, I think, is a really, really good marriage.
Right now, which college football team can stake claim to the best in the state, and who will be the best in the state come December?
It's either Texas Tech or Texas. Texas, obviously, I hate to give it to them because they lost the game, but they played so well to start. But Tech is 2-0 with a ranked win at home. So I'll give the slight edge to Joey McGuire's crew because they are indeed 2-0. And like I said, no disrespect to Texas, but you got to win. So Texas may, and they'll settle it in a few weeks in Lubbock. Yeah, they'll see each other on the field in 2 weeks. So we'll find out who the better of the two is. But if I was ranking them today, I think I'd give Texas Tech the slight edge just because they've started off really, really well.
And who do you think finishes the regular season as the best team in Texas?
Wow. Well, if Baylor's going to get to the Big 12 championship game, it's got to be them. I'm still not ready to say Texas. And back to your earlier question about the Big 12 championship game, I didn't say Texas because I really need to see these next couple of weeks. I think these next couple of weeks will tell me about Texas. I'll still stick with Baylor at the end of the day. I still think, like I said, with what they have on the line of scrimmage, I think they'll figure it out. Last year they went through this when they lost to Oklahoma State. They bounced back and they were really able to grow beyond that. Now they have a lot of pieces they had to replace in that regard, but I'll still stick with them for now and say that Dave Aranda, I think, can still right the ship, especially with all the coaching staff stability they have with the coordinator back and everything. I'll still stick with Baylor, ends up being the best in the state.
And final question, let's bring it back to TCU. You look at the program from the big picture view. What's the single biggest change that you see in the program, and what's Sonny Dykes' ceiling in Fort Worth?
I think they could get back down the road. I mean, it's not going to happen this year, but I do think they can get back to the Big 12 championship game. And ultimately, when you talk about the future of the playoff, then if you're a Big 12 champion, then you're talking playoff contention. So I do think down the road that is possible. The biggest change I've seen, aside from what we talked about, which is just how open the program is to, the public can even go to spring practice and things like that. The other big change I saw was, and I'm sure you've heard it, is just little things like the nutrition, the player welfare, how they're making sure guys are being cared for physically. I know they're planning to do some stuff to the weight room at some point. They're trying to make sure that their players are trained, fed, taken care of, rehabbed, all that stuff at a really, really high level. And I think that stuff is going, people don't write about that. People don't think about it nationally, but I think that stuff is going to go a really, really long way for this program. I really do, because this sport is so demanding. It's so physical. And I think you have to, and especially now in the transfer portal era, you have to do it. I think you have to do the whole equation. You have to take care of the whole athlete, the whole person, not just the football part. So that those little things I think are the biggest thing that have changed for me. Also, and then I guess one more thing I'll add is the recruiting part is I just think the energy around the recruiting has kind of elevated. I think that what they've done from a recruiting staff standpoint and some of the people they've added and brought over, I think have really given a boost. And you could tell that recruiting has gone pretty well this cycle. And I think they're going to finish pretty well too.
Yeah, I mean, the nutrition, I heard the word nutrition more at Big 12 Media Days than I did my freshman year nutrition class at TCU. So, Sam, so awesome to have you on. Really love getting the chance to talk to you. Absolute expert in the Big 12 and Texas college football and just college football as a whole. You can obviously find your work on The Athletic. Tell us where people can be following you on social media.
Yeah, SCon Jr. on Twitter. That's where I post all my stories and our podcast that me and Max do once a week on Wednesdays or Thursdays on the Andy Staples Show and Friends feed. I'll always post those links there too, so check it out.
And your story on Jimbo, I thought was excellent. So that
Thank you.
one, the most recent one this week. So as it all is all your work. So give him a follow, guys. Check it out. If you're like subscribe to Frog Stay, but also subscribe to The Athletic to get the national picture too. Plus, you might actually read some TCU stories now that those guys can get in and
That's right.
talk to the players. So I think that was a big complaint for TCU fans in the past. But you know, you can only write about what you can write about. And
That's
I think
right.
there's a little more opportunity to write now. So. Thank you again. Really appreciate the time, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.